Hello, and welcome back to the Plan to Peak Health and Human Performance video blog. This presentation, I'm Peter Cummings. I'm Peter Cummings. I'm coach and I'm a metabolic health practitioner. The subject today is about overtraining and overreaching, or in other words, finding the sweet spot, the zone of enhanced performance. I had the privilege of visiting the Olympic Training Center on multiple occasions. And on one occasion, head of athletic performance and a senior sports physiologist at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, Dr. Randy Wilbur, gave us a presentation regarding the different levels of stress and load and their interplay with finding the optimal balance to enhance performance. And this presentation, in large part, is based off of his presentation. So the first thing Randy got into were these different phases and understanding what they are and how our bodies respond to the different loads of training that we might put ourselves under. And performance is a major indicator within each. So in the undertraining phase or zone, you may see minor physiologic adaptations, but no real performance improvements. Now, I might say here that sometimes undertraining is needed to allow recovery, and you'll see that as I move forward here, that well-timed recovery from loading is part of the adaptation process. So there's times when you are in that overreaching status that you need to undertrain for a brief period of time to really achieve optimal results. And the acute loading phase is, think of it as a short duration, maybe a week, where positive adaptations do take place and minor performance improvements might take place as well. But to really achieve the type of performance improvements that top athletes achieve, you need to move up into this overreaching or chronic loading phase. So this is multiple weeks of appropriate loading, whether it be volume and base or intensity during build phases. And it's in this type of phase that you're at the highest risk of overtraining, but you also can find the best benefit. And I point out that it does require sometimes a few days, and if not a full week, to recover from a good overreaching phase or block. Now, with that said, how do we know if we're moving towards overtraining? Well, unfortunately, there are some physiologic signs, which I'll discuss in this video, but the one that confirms it typically is that when you provide yourself with what you have normally seen as adequate recovery, the performance does not return. So you see a performance decrease through fatigue, and the normal amount of recovery is not doing the trick. That's a sign that you may have crossed over into that overtraining phase. And this is what we would define as the zone of enhanced performance. And you can see that I did include a little bit of undertraining to represent the time periods when you do need some recovery to really gain the full benefit from the loading that you've already done. And I think this is a big problem with athletes, the more is better mentality. It's not that simple. You really do need to do the work, but you also need to allow yourself to recover from that work if you're going to optimize the response that you're trying to get. So how do we recognize overtraining? As I said, I think the performance decline, number one, and Randy Wilbur felt very strongly about that despite a lot of the physiologic responses, the immune responses, the psychological changes that we see, the number one way to confirm it is the athlete is declining in performance, and with recovery, that is not immediately responding. That response that we would normally see as a positive adaptation and performance is not occurring. But you're also seeing immune responses, inflammation, You see resting heart rate changes, changing in your sleeping patterns. These are all signs that you should not ignore when you're going through your training. So causes and models of overtraining. Well, it was difficult for him to put a finger on it. There's no single cause. You need to understand, as I described, overreaching is what we want to work towards, but we're at risk for overtraining. Time periods that I have seen that athletes can push too far is when they fail to recognize that their training does not exist in a vacuum. We have lives, we have families, we have jobs, and sometimes additional work or life stress or disturbances in our sleep can take what would be a normal overreaching chronic load block and turn it into a nightmare. So you have to be ready to adjust your training plan based on multiple inputs, not just the numbers you're seeing off of your power meter, how much duration you're putting in or anything like that. You have to take a serious look at your responses and be prepared and honest with yourself that when you understand that I'm going through a hard phase at work or a stressful life situation, your training may have to be dialed down to avoid an overtraining situation. The physiologic models that Randy brought up, although again none of them were concrete, he talks about glycogen depletion as one of the models. Now, with that said, I don't want you to think that means you should just keep eating more carbs, because the glycogen replenishment is much more than carbohydrate intake. And I'll talk about that a little bit. But again, I refer you to the article as it gets into a lot more detail than the video. And you can find that on my blog page. But the immune suppression that is associated, we see this. We see autonomic nervous system balance. If you understand heart rate variability or use heart rate variability, that's what autonomic nervous system imbalance is higher variability. Suggests a state of rest and relaxation, where a lower heart rate variability suggests a sympathetic response, such as training, stressful situation, fight or flight balance, central fatigue, and elevated cytokines and inflammation. So what Randy Wilber identifies is none of those in particular all the time, but usually some form or mix of these usually appear in the overtrained athlete. So how do we prevent this from happening? Well, following a periodized training plan, I would refer to my article on periodized training and how that can bring structure, but also by controlling the variability, you can also understand your response to your training load better by changing as few variables as possible. And that's what periodization kind of brings to you, rather than the herky-jerky ride when I feel and just throw out some miles. It's very difficult to problem solve if you start to get in a situation where you're wondering, am I overreaching or have I gone too far? Because there's just too many variables to identify. I can assure you that even when you follow a periodized plan, there's still more than enough variables to leave questions. But if you're not following a periodized plan, it's very, very difficult to put your finger on what might be wrong. But monitoring your daily metrics, your resting heart rate, your heart rate variability, your weight, your stress levels, these are all great ways of putting some context to the training load that you're under and really understanding how you're responding to your training. Suppression of your heart rate a little bit during overreaching is normal. Seeing your heart rate respond very quickly after you've rested, that's normal. But you need to understand those responses and keep track of them to really benefit from it, because again, it puts your training and your training load into context. Another way you really have to help yourself out is through nutrition and being your best advocate. I do recommend that during the fall, once your training load starts coming down, right before you really start getting back into training, getting a baseline blood work and looking at your biochemistry. Again, I refer to your article. I give you a full list of things that you could take a look at. These will really help you to know if need be that you can look at your blood work. If you're at a time period where you're thinking you possibly may be overtraining, the blood work will tell you a lot. I do recommend therapeutic dose multivitamins. I definitely refer you to my article in this case. You have to make sure you're getting the right supplements because there is a risk for unintentional doping. So take a look at the article for recommendations on that. And this idea about carbohydrates and protein intake, I like to see athletes taking in 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram. And as far as carbs, the argument that is taking place now in the community, I'm very concerned about it, but I refer athletes to get enough carbohydrates. I find the same reason people get sick, which is chronic excessive carbohydrate consumption, is something athletes often refer to as carb loading. And I think you need to understand the relationship between our food and the metabolic issues that we see and the metabolic optimization that you're hoping for as an athlete. You should add recovery techniques. Focus on passive rest. How good is your sleep quality? Do you have strict sleep times? Using things like the hydrotherapies that are out, cold immersion, sauna. And I did a video blog, an article on hydration electrolytes. Putting yourself in a dehydrated, under-electrolyzed state is a surefire way of putting an additional stress on your body on top of the training load. So trying to optimize these recovery techniques and monitor yourself and being honest with what's going on in your training and your life is very important to optimize your training and avoid the ill effects of overtraining. So final recommendations, make sure that you balance the intake of carbohydrates and protein and fats with your need for electrolytes. I would find a reputable brand for multivitamin to avoid unintentional doping, which does happen a lot more than we think. And biochemistry, I would get some blood work done in the off season when you know that you're not under a lot of load and you're probably under the least amount of inflammation and things like that, to understand that when you are under load, how you may be changing. I'm available for consultations at an hourly basis. I make custom training plans, and we obviously have our premium coaching services available to those that are interested. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you again.